This team actually has a very interesting opportunity ahead of them. I think you might want to hear about it. I'll explain that today on Locked on Blue Jackets.
You're Locked on Blue Jackets, your daily podcast on the Columbus Blue Jackets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome to Locked on Blue Jackets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Hayden Heilsorn. Back with me tomorrow is my co-host, Jay Foster. We are here to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly of your favorite team and ours, the Columbus Blue Jackets. I want to say thank you to the everydayers for making this your first listen every day. Locked on Blue Jackets is free and available on all podcast platforms. We're free right here on YouTube. Hit subscribe if you're watching there. We're also free on the SiriusXM app. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Go to a game with Game Time. And so I'll explain what I meant by that to start the video, where I said very interesting opportunity ahead of the Blue Jackets, because I think you guys know by now that I've already called this season over. And even though it is over, this Jackets team isn't going to amount to a playoff team. They're not going to do anything. Even if they did get in the playoffs, they wouldn't do anything. They'd probably get swept. It would be very similar to what they did back in the Ken Hitchcock days, where they made a playoff and just got beaten in 4 games. It'll be something like that if they make the playoffs. So the season's over. The season's a wash. If I were the general manager of this team, I would tell them, hey, lose as many games as possible, because Macklin Celebrini is tearing up the NCAA right now. So it's fine if you just tank, get the best chance, get the best odds at getting him, which is a 25% chance. If you finish dead last in the NHL, you have a 25% chance at getting that. You have the biggest ping pong ball in the bucket of ping pong balls. I know that's not exactly how it goes, but that's what I would tell the Blue Jackets. If I was a part of the organization, that's what I would be saying. Obviously, that's not what's probably being said. They're probably trying to figure out how to get this thing back on track and still push for a playoff, because they don't want to waste the prime of Patrick Laine, Zach Werenski, Johnny Gaudreau, Erica Branson, Boone Jenner. I'm going to put all those guys. They don't want to waste the prime of those guys' career. Maybe Erica Branson isn't at the end of it, but I'm just fired up from listening to Jay's episode yesterday as he was talking about Erica Branson and just how that whole situation ended up going down in that game against Florida. I'm on the stance that Erica Branson's been one of my favorite players this year, and I love the fact that fighting is in the game of hockey, because I just think there's something about a guy taking a cheap shot at you and you being able to stand up for yourself and show what that looks like in a way that doesn't really take place every day in life, or at least shouldn't, right? Nobody should be getting bumped by somebody in the street, immediately standing up and dropping their winter gloves and throwing with somebody, and at the subway station. That shouldn't be happening. It does happen, unfortunately, but the fact that does happen in an NHL game is what is I'm like, this is okay. These guys are getting paid a lot of money to be out here, and they signed up for this, so it is what it is. I personally enjoy that aspect of hockey, and I think Erica Branson walks a good line of not going overboard, being that character of, I'm the fighter. I'm not just going to stick up for myself, but I'm going to stick up for my teammates, which he's done that all year. He's been sticking up for teammates left and right. It's part of the reason why the Blue Jackets brought him in, was to be that guy. But it was cool to see him have to stick up for himself. And for him to only get a 1-game suspension, I thought was was awesome because I thought it could have been a lot more, obviously. I thought it could have been up to 5 games or 6 games. Who knows what a suspension like that could have came down on him. I mean, a suspension had just got hit on David Perron for sticking up for one of his teammates, Dylan Larkin. He got suspended for 6 games for what he did the other night. So I thought the Blue Jackets made out pretty good in this situation. And I'm not – anyway, Jay's thoughts, I reiterate what he said about everything that needs to be changed about NHL officiating in general. I just thought he did a really good job covering just kind of this podcast thoughts on that. I agreed with a lot of what he said. So go check that out if you haven't already. Still time to do that. Today I'm going to be talking about this Leafs game coming up because, as I said, the Blue Jackets have an interesting opportunity. And yes, it is if they win enough games in the next 8, that's how many games they have left before the end of the year. If they win enough games in the next 8, they could go into the new year maybe in a different position to where it's like, okay, the playoffs are still realistic. And if that is possible as a fan, yes, I want that. I want that. I'm saying with my looking into the future brain and just planning out the direction of this franchise, I think it's best to just tank for Macklin Celebrini often and early because this team is not going to be able to function much longer than a couple weeks of the rest of the NHL season. I'd love to be proven wrong. And if I am proven wrong, that means that I'm rooting for games, rooting for this team to climb the Metropolitan standings, rooting for them to sneak into a wild card spot. That's all going to be fun for me as a fan. So yes, obviously I'm rooting for that. And even though, as I've said many times, that's not going to happen, they're not going to claw their way back into a playoff spot. There's just no way. It is possible still because there's 8 games ahead of them. And the Blue Jackets are just that team that can play with anybody. So because they can play with anybody, that technically means they can beat anybody. And we've seen them beat really good teams this year out of nowhere. The Columbus Blue Jackets, I was actually Christmas shopping with my wife the other day, and I noticed this Ohio t-shirt at some store that we were at that made a joke about the Ohio weather, which I thought was awesome. I mean, the Ohio weather is just completely laughable. How one day it is, 22 degrees, snowy, overcast, and the next day it's 65 and the sun's out. Like, Ohio weather can flip like that in the month of December, in January and February. You never know when one of those days is going to hit you. That is exactly how the Blue Jackets play hockey. That's exactly what they do. They can come out one day and just be frigid and just slow moving and just, brittle and just seem weak. And then the next night they can come out firing and look like the 16 game winning streak Columbus Blue Jackets from the 2017 season. Like, they can do that in just the snap of a finger, it seems like. So they just, because of that, and because Ohio weather is what it is, you never get consistency is the point. You never get consistent 65 days of sun unless it's obviously July. But even then, you're going to be getting high 80s and 90s. So it's like it's all over the place. So you never know what you're going to get with this team. But if they do happen to decide that right now is going to be the moment that they're going to start playing consistent hockey, it would be a heck of a time to do so because they got 8 games ahead of them, 16 possible points, but they only play 4 teams. Let me explain. So they play the Leafs, Devils, Sabres, Capitals, Leafs, Devils, Leafs, Sabres. Let me say that again. They play Toronto, New Jersey, Buffalo, Washington, Toronto, New Jersey, Toronto, Buffalo. They played the Maple Leafs 3 times in the next 8 games. They played Buffalo twice, they played New Jersey twice, and they play the Capitals just once, but they've played the Capitals twice already recently this year. So it's wild, like, how the NHL schedule just works out, and I never know how these leagues make up their schedules. It's simply amazing every time they get released. I'm like, wow, I would never be able to figure this out. This is impressive. But it's just comical that the Blue Jackets have a stretch like that where they play 8 games but are only playing 4 teams. I guess it's not that crazy. We kind of got used to that during COVID when they were doing the 2 games at a time thing. So I guess it was possible back then to do that. And the Blue Jackets have had maybe crazier schedules in the past, but this just seems wild for in the next 18 days to be playing only 4 teams, but be playing 8 games. Like it's crazy. And I want to get into what I think the Blue Jackets can do during this stretch because my prediction is, yeah, it's whatever. But I think the highs and lows of this stretch could be very interesting, and I'll explain that next on Locked On Blue Jackets. There have been some times when I'm getting the family together or getting some friends together and I'm trying to put on a big show, take my friends or family to a game, and I'm just struggling with whatever app I'm using at the time. I've had so many issues with other apps in the past, but I'll tell you, since I switched over to Game Time, I have had no worries when I'm buying tickets to my big events. Game Time is a super fast and easy way to buy tickets for all sports, music, and comedy events near you. It's the winter. It's kind of, it's not really patio weather. You don't really sit outside. You don't really go golfing. So go to a show, go to a comedy show, go to an indoor, NBA or an NHL game in your area. You can do all those things with Game Time. They have last minute tickets, flash deals, zone deals where you pick the zone, they pick the seat in the zone. It's a great deal for you. Easy way to find and buy tickets for every kind of event in your area. Views from your seat, right when you're on the app, you can see that right away. They have the lowest price guaranteed. And I'm just obsessed with Game Time. I actually get on this app every single day. Anytime I think about a game that's coming up, I'm just curious of what tickets look like, even if it's a game taking place all the way across the country. It's just a fun app to spend time on. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, the Blue Jackets are going through a little gauntlet here to end the season. A little gauntlet. It is 8 games in 18 days, and I don't think the Blue Jackets are going to get more than 2 wins in the next 8 games. I see them beating the Sabres on the road. That's a very winnable game. Buffalo's, we just did a trade between the Blue Jackets and the Sabres, so we know that team isn't really in the best of situations if they're willing to do deals with the Blue Jackets right now. And yeah, then they play the Capitals. At some point, the Blue Jackets are going to beat the Capitals. Okay, like the Capitals are an okay team. They're not tearing up the Metro right now, and the Blue Jackets beat them in the preseason for dress rehearsal night. And ever since that night, I just thought, oh, Columbus they're going to be fine against the Capitals this year. They're 14-8-3. They've won 2 in a row. So they're heating up a little bit, but come on. Blue Jackets, I have them winning that game at home at Nationwide. I just feel like that just feels like to me a game that they would that they're gonna win. I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I shouldn't feel that way because the Blue Jackets have been terrible against the Metro at home, it feels like this year, but I have good vibes for that one early. I have them losing to, well, I guess let's just go through it. So I have them losing to the Leafs to start the 8-game stretch. I have them losing to the Devil. Well, they're not going to be the Leafs. I'll explain who the Leafs are as a team. I'll get a jump start on them because they're very good and they're just a really good team. And the Blue Jackets are not going to win Thursday night in Toronto. There's just no way. Like there's no way. So I have that as a loss. I have them losing to the Devils at home, even though that's a winnable game, because all these games are winnable for the Blue Jackets. As I said, Ohio weather. But I think they're going to lose this one. They kind of stole one from the Devils on the road earlier this year, that Black Friday game. That might have been Eric Robinson's last goal as a Blue Jacket, actually. Speaking of him, I think he had the game-winning goal in that game, I'm pretty sure. It was a 2-1 win. Great win for Elvis that day. That was awesome. I thought that was the jump start to the Blue Jackets clawing their way back into a playoff spot. And now here we are like 3 weeks later, and it's like they're not anywhere closer to a playoff spot. In fact, they're farther away. But they have a stretch ahead of them still to get back in it. They're not going to do it, but we're talking about it anyway. So I have them losing to the Devils. I have them winning in Buffalo for all the reasons I said. I have them winning against the Capitals just because, and you could flip the Capitals and Devils game because they're both 2 home Metro games. I just think the Blue Jackets win one of those somehow. And then they host the Leafs after the Capitals. I have that as a loss. Again, the Leafs are just a juggernaut right now. You're not going to beat them. I have them losing in New Jersey following that. They play the Leafs again at home after New Jersey. I have them not winning that one and not going any better. And then I have the Sabres getting revenge to end the year the day before New Year's Eve. So, yeah, that's how I have it. That is 2-5-1 if things go the way that I predict that they will go. That gives them 5 of the possible 16 points in that stretch, which would put them on January 1st at 11-21-6, which would be not that good. You would not feel any better about being 11-21-6 as your team's record, I'm sure. Now, what I think, if the Blue Jackets did something crazy, I tried to also go through this exercise where I put on my positive cap and just think, okay, what is a realistic outcome here for the Blue Jackets? Like if they just went a little bit nuts enough to win some games, like what would get me feeling good, something that is somewhat attainable. And I'll tell you, I have them still losing to the Leafs to start this 8-game stretch on the road. I have them beating the Devils. Just win your games at Nationwide. So I looked at this 8-game stretch. They play 4 on the road, 4 at home. If they defend Nationwide, if they defend Nationwide and they sweep the Sabres and split with the Devils, they could be 6-2 after that stretch, which would give them 12 of 16 possible points, putting them 15-18-5 going into 2024, which I would feel a lot better about that. 15-18-5 sounds pretty decent to me still. Like that doesn't – I know I've called this season over. I know I've said there's no reason to do anything other than to tank. But if the Blue Jackets were somehow 15-18-5 in January with an extra 12 points on top of what they have right now, which is not a lot. They have 23 points, which is I can't figure. I'm looking at the division. It's a lot out of a playoff spot. It is, it's 9 points out of a playoff spot right now. If they get a possible 12 and things slow down ahead of them, they could cut that in half to maybe like 6 points out of a playoff spot, which that would mean that you have a season to play for, certainly in the month of January, which I'm looking ahead, you play a lot of games on the road. In fact, at the end of January is your Western Canada stretch. So, yeah, you got the Oilers, Flames, Canucks, Kraken, and Blues to end January. So it's going to be an interesting month. But if the Blue Jackets dig in these next 8 games and do something crazy like win all 8 of them, they'd be 17-16-5 going into 2024. That would be crazy. That would be nuts. I'm not saying it's gonna happen. I'm not even saying it's possible. First of all, shout out Wilfried Nancy, the head coach of the Columbus Crew. Just a baller quote after he just won his first MLS Cup in his first season as the Columbus Crew head coach. He said, "Impossible is an opinion." That's just an awesome quote. That's great. I love that. What? Win all 8 of these games, Blue Jackets. Beat beat the Leafs, Devils, Sabres, Capitals. Yeah, just beat those 4 teams twice. No, the Leafs 3 times, Capitals once, Devils twice, Sabres twice. You do that, and boom, you're 17, 16, and 5. And that would put you 3 or 4 points out of a playoff spot. Hell, it might even put you in a playoff spot. It might. So if you just go crazy, then the world is your oyster, Blue Jackets. And we can go into 2024, as a 5th line, just ready to live it up, because why not? 17, 16, and 5. That would be awesome, guys. Come on. Am I the only one hyped about this? Well, I'm literally the only one here right now. So I'm just going to take a break and look. We're going to take a closer look at the Toronto Maple Leafs, because that is the team that the Blue Jackets play 3 times in the next 8 games. And I just think they're worth a look at. It might shatter everything that I just said. We'll see. We'll do that next on Locked On Blue Jackets. Well, all things are possible, as I just mentioned back there. That quote from Wilfried Nancy, impossible is an opinion. The Blue Jackets could win the Stanley Cup. Adam Fantilli could do something like score 50 goals this year. And if the Blue Jackets did win the Stanley Cup, and if Adam Fantilli did score 50 goals, that would be pretty sweet. It is possible. But it's even more possible than that. The chances of you winning 100 times your cash in daily fantasy hockey contest with Sleeper. Sleeper is the official daily fantasy app of Locked On NHL Network. It's our number 1 choice for daily fantasy sports, especially for daily fantasy hockey, because with Sleeper, again, you can win 100 times your cash in daily fantasy hockey contests. I would do things like I would pick a guy like William Nylander. I mean, he's playing on an awesome power play. He's any one of those 5 guys on the Leafs power play right now. Pick them, and you can win 100 times your money. All you got to do is pick a guy like that, and you will record more or less than their sleeper projections for things like goals, assists, saves, plus, minus, and more in any given game for a chance to win 100 times your bet on Sleeper. You need to correctly predict the outcome of 8 player stats. You heard me, Blue Jackets fans. You win 100 times your money playing daily fantasy hockey with Sleeper. So start paying attention and nail your picks. Use promo code LOCKEDONNHL, and you'll get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. That's code LOCKEDONNHL. See Sleeper's terms of use for details and location availability. For the record, my prediction was for the next 8 games, the Blue Jackets would go 2-5-1, and I have them losing all 3 to the Toronto Maple Leafs, who I just watched on Tuesday night beat up the New York Rangers, who are number 1 in the leaders of the Metropolitan Division. The Toronto Maple Leafs are 3rd in the Atlantic, and they just beat the Rangers on the road in Madison Square Garden 7-3. And I watched a little bit of that 3rd period. I thought the Leafs would choke that one away. The Leafs are kind of known to choke late games. They've played a lot of overtime games. I just learned that tonight from the broadcast. They've played 12 overtime games this year, which is more than any team. So they're pushing games. They like to play for a team like the Blue Jackets, who only likes to play 40 minutes of hockey every night. It's not good to be running into a team that likes to play 60 minutes plus every single night, because that is definitely a team like the Toronto Maple Leafs. And if you watch them for a little bit, you know instantly why they are what they are. They are totally unlike any other team in the league right now from the way that they play their defense. And I'm really impressed with the job that Sheldon Keefe has done in the last several years since taking over for Mike Babcock, who was dismissed. And, many people were like, hey, Mike Babcock, kind of a good coach. Why did they fire him? Was he necessarily the issue? Were the star players not performing well? Well, I didn't realize this, but Sheldon Keefe has coached back-to-back 50-win seasons for this team, and I would have thought, oh yeah, Mike Babcock did something similar. No, Babcock in 5 years did not once get the Maple Leafs to 50 wins. And in fact, the highest he got that team to finish in the division was third. And Sheldon Keefe in 4 years hasn't finished lower than third and has in fact won their division multiple times, which is a good, that's a sign that that guy is one of the best coaches in the NHL, because I know they are loaded, but you still got to have the right guy behind the bench to get them all to play together and to balance the egos in the room. And the Leafs are definitely doing that. And they play a very, very fun to watch brand of hockey. Not even, it's not necessarily, I don't know if it's fun. I think it's fun to the diehard hockey fan, but there's something kind of pretty about the way that they play hockey. And I like that about a team from the Toronto Maple Leafs, because there is something to be said about one of those old historic hockey and any sort of sport, any sort of professional sport. Whenever that old historic team just plays a very disciplined game, it feels like it really is like watching the perfect team. And I feel like the Leafs are that. I feel like they are the perfect team right now. And things are going to change as, time goes on. They're going to have to get a little grittier because the games themselves will get tougher. But watching them play the Rangers tonight was awesome, because they skate around, and I noticed this instantly about every single player when the Rangers had the puck. So the Leafs are on defense. They all have their sticks way out in front of them, and they are skating, and they're playing in this position that is just, they're not looking to make contact and make a check that strips the player from the puck. And, they're not looking to do that necessarily. They're not coming in guns a-blazing on a guy. They're just slowly approaching the puck carrier for the other team and just making space with their sticks, which is just a great way to play defense, because one, you're making yourself bigger as a player. You're going to create more turnovers because of that, because you're taking up more space. You're not allowing as much of a room to pass. And it also slows the game down a little bit. It gets that player to think a little bit more. He's not used to seeing every single player on an opposing team's forecheck coming at them with their sticks way wide. And I just think the fact that the Leafs do that influences a very disciplined game. And I think if you look at their power play this year, I don't even need to read their power play stats, because I'm sure they're phenomenal, because their power play consists of John Tavares, Austin Matthews, Morgan Riley, William Nylander, and Mitch Marner, which is just, watching their power play tonight at Madison Square Garden was just beautiful, because it was Tavares to Matthews to Morgan Riley to the back of the net. And it's just pretty. It's nice to see things work for somebody else. I mean, it's nice to see something work. You hate that it is for somebody else. And when I watched the Leafs tonight, I just thought, man, this team is playing polar opposite hockey from the Blue Jackets right now, which, to no fault of Pascal Vincent, is just, the Blue Jackets are a very young team. They have a lot of players playing for the first time together. They have a lot of players that don't even all speak the same language. So communication is probably a challenge in itself, let alone these are all young players trying to learn the game of hockey, not even just life in America, but they're trying to learn the game of hockey still at the NHL level. And it can be overwhelming. And that shows when watching as a fan. That definitely shows when the Blue Jackets get overwhelmed and their young players get overwhelmed. You know it, you can see it. I don't think the Toronto Maple Leafs are a team that gets overwhelmed in the slightest. So I don't have the Blue Jackets winning these 3 games against the Maple Leafs coming up. And that's just, we'll talk about it more tomorrow. Tomorrow we'll actually do a full Leafs Blue Jackets preview episode. Jay will be back. We'll get his thoughts on the next 8 games ahead. Maybe he feels differently about them. Maybe something will happen in the next 24 hours that'll change our mind, because Jarmo is a guy that he can make he'll make moves in the middle of the night. He's like Bob Seger, like he's making night moves out here, so he's a baller. We'll see though. We will see. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. As I said, tomorrow we'll be talking about what's ahead for Columbus. This first game Thursday of this 8-game stretch is against the Leafs on the road. Hey, maybe the Blue Jackets can start off hot. If they win that one, that's probably their toughest one in the next 8 days. So in the next 8 games. So if they win that one, that'll definitely jumpstart things for the remaining 7. But we'll also talk about that. There was also some good news in the NHL today that I didn't get to, that I'm really excited to talk to Jay about, get his opinion on. It involves the NHL skills competition. Very big news coming out of the league today. As always, thank you to the everydayers for making this podcast possible. Thank you for listening. You can find me on Twitter at HaydenH971. You can find Jay on there at _JAKOBFORSTER. The show is on there at LO_Blue Jackets. If you have any comments, questions, or concerns, please direct those to lockedonbluejackets@gmail.com. Thank you once again for listening, and until tomorrow, make sure you stay locked on.